Dawn broke over Ruby Freeman's homestead as Apache warriors surrounded her cabin, declaring she had married their unconscious war chief by accepting his sacred bundle. The morning light caught the blood on her hands and the red clay from the medicine pouch she still clutched. 3 days of nursing a dying man had somehow bound her to him forever. Stormwalker dismounted first. His weathered face showed no emotion as he pushed past Ruby into the small adobe cabin. 11 other warriors followed, their moccasins silent on the packed earth floor. Inside, Hawk Ridge lay motionless on Ruby's kitchen table, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Ruby's heart hammered against her ribs. She had found the Apache war chief 3 days ago, shot and left for dead after a cavalry raid. The same instinct that had helped runaway slaves find freedom had compelled her to drag his bleeding body inside. She had worked through 2 nights to save him, never knowing the cost. Gray Eagle, the eldest warrior, examined Hawk Ridge's hands. The sacred bundle remained pressed against his palm, its leather cords stained with blood and earth. The old man's eyes moved to Ruby's fingers, marked with the same mixture. By the old laws, Gray Eagle said in careful English, when a woman accepts a warrior's sacred bundle during his spirit walk between worlds, she becomes his wife. The spirits have witnessed this. Ruby stepped backward. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had survived slavery, war, and 2 years of frontier isolation. She had built this life with her own hands, traded her healing knowledge for supplies, carved independence from nothing. Now these men claimed she belonged to someone else. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I just saved his life." Stormwalker's expression softened slightly. "You saved his spirit, black woman. Now you bound to his spirit. Apache law." Ruby looked at the unconscious man on her table. She remembered him from trading encounters at the settlement. Unlike other Apache warriors, he'd always nodded respectfully when their paths crossed. During his delirium, he had spoken of someone named Elena, calling out in Apache and broken English. His fever had broken only yesterday. "What if I refuse?" Ruby asked. Gray Eagle's weathered face grew grave. "The spirits you have angered will bring death to your land. Your water will dry up, your food will spoil, and the white soldiers will find you within 3 sunsets." The threat hung in the morning air like smoke. Ruby understood spiritual warnings, but she also recognized the practical reality behind them. Colonel Tavington's cavalry had been hunting this war party for weeks. If they found Apache warriors at her cabin, questions would be asked. Answers would be demanded. Stormwalker moved closer to his brother, checking the bandages Ruby had applied. "You did good work," he admitted grudgingly. "But soldiers come. They follow blood trail here." Ruby's chest tightened. She had always known this day might come. Her isolation had protected her from the worst of frontier prejudice, but it had also left her vulnerable. A black woman living alone drew suspicion from settlers and cavalry alike. Now she faced a choice between spiritual consequences she didn't understand and very real dangers she knew too well. "I need time to think," she said. "No time," Stormwalker replied. "We move today. Take my brother. Take you." Ruby looked around. Her small cabin. Every board, every stone, every careful improvement represented months of backbreaking work. She had built this sanctuary after losing everything else. Her husband Samuel lay buried in Georgia soil. Her dreams of quiet independence would die here in Arizona dust, but staying meant facing Tavington's questions alone. The colonel's reputation for dealing with Apache sympathizers was well known. Ruby had no desire to test his mercy. Hawk Ridge stirred on the table, his eyes fluttering open. Ruby moved to his side instinctively, checking his pulse and temperature. His fever had broken completely. The infection that had nearly killed him was finally retreating. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The woman who saved me." Ruby met his gaze. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, but clear now. "Alert. You were dying," she said simply. Hawk Ridge tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. He noticed the sacred bundle in his hands, then looked at Ruby's stained fingers. Understanding passed between them without words. "My brother told you about the marriage," he said. Ruby nodded. "I didn't know saving your life would bind me to anything." Hawk Ridge studied her face carefully. "You are not like other white women." "I'm not white," Ruby replied firmly. "I'm not accepted by their world any more than you are." Something shifted in Hawk Ridge's expression, recognition perhaps. "Or understanding. You are also outside," he said quietly. "I suppose we're both outcasts," Ruby agreed. Stormwalker approached the table. "Brother, we must go." "Soldiers come." Hawk Ridge struggled to sit up fully, his brother supporting his weight. "How long do we have? Maybe 2 hours. Maybe less." Ruby felt the walls of her small world closing. She could pack quickly, take only what mattered most. But leaving meant accepting a marriage she had never chosen, joining a people whose ways she didn't understand. Staying meant facing Tavington's cavalry alone. The choice was no choice at all. "I'll need a few minutes to gather supplies," she said quietly. Stormwalker nodded. "We help." As the Apache warriors began loading Ruby's medical supplies and personal belongings, she took one last look around her cabin. The morning light streaming through the windows would soon illuminate empty rooms. By sunset, this chapter of her life would be closed forever. Hawk Ridge watched her from where he sat on the table's edge. "You have regrets," he observed. Ruby considered the question. "I have fears," she corrected. "But everyone has those." "Fear is wisdom," Hawk Ridge said. "Courage is acting despite fear." Ruby nodded, understanding passing between them again. They were both about to step into unknown territory. Both had lost their first lives to violence and circumstance. Perhaps they could build something new from the ruins. Outside, horses stamped and snorted in the morning air. The Apache warriors moved with efficient silence, preparing for another day of survival on the run. Ruby gathered her few precious possessions, including Samuel's letters and her mother's Bible. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Soon, Ruby Freeman would disappear into the vast Arizona territory, bound to a man she barely knew, heading toward a future she couldn't imagine. But as she helped Hawk Ridge to his feet, steadying him against her shoulder, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years of isolation. She was no longer alone. The truth came as they prepared to leave. Ruby was securing medical supplies in leather pouches when Hawk Ridge spoke from where he sat on the wagon bed, his voice cutting through the morning air. "I was not sleeping when I gave you the bundle." Ruby's hands stilled on the leather straps. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. She turned slowly, meeting his steady gaze. "I chose you," he continued. The betrayal hit her chest like a physical blow. Her fingers tightened on the pouch until her knuckles went white. 3 days she had nursed him, believing his fevered actions were unconscious. 3 days she had fought to save a man who had deliberately trapped her. "You lead to me. I saved you." Hawk Ridge's voice carried no apology. "There are other war parties in these mountains. They would have killed you for helping me. Now you are under my protection." Ruby's jaw clenched. The same protective instinct that had driven her to help runaway slaves, to nurse a dying enemy, now felt like weakness. She had survived 2 years alone on this frontier. She had built a life from nothing after losing everything. "I don't need your protection," she said, each word sharp as broken glass. "I've survived alone for 2 years. Not anymore." "Hawk!" Ridge struggled to stand, his brother moving to support him. "Colonel Tavington knows someone helped me. He will come." The name sent ice through Ruby's veins. Tavington's reputation reached every settlement in the territory. His methods for dealing with Apache sympathizers were legendary for their cruelty. But the colonel's interest in her would run deeper than simple Apache assistance. Storm Walker approached, his face grim, smoke rising from the east. "Your homestead burns." Ruby's breath caught. She had known this moment would come, but seeing the thin gray line against the morning sky made it real. Everything she had built was turning to ash. Her carefully tended garden, her small collection of books, the rocking chair Samuel had made. For her in Georgia, all of it gone. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of burning wood across the desert. Ruby closed her eyes, feeling the last threads of her old life snap. When she opened them, Hawk Ridge was watching her with something. That might have been sympathy. "You cannot go back," he said quietly. "I know." The words tasted like dust. Storm Walker mounted his horse, scanning the horizon. "We move now. Soldiers will follow the smoke." Ruby climbed onto the wagon beside Hawk Ridge, her movements mechanical. The Apache warriors formed a protective circle around them, their faces alert for danger. She had become their responsibility now, whether she wanted it or not. The wagon lurched forward, wheels grinding against stone and sand. Ruby gripped the wooden seat, watching her homestead disappear behind red rock formations. With each mile, her old life faded further into memory. Hawk Ridge sat beside her in silence, his shoulder pressed against hers for balance. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the sage and cedar smoke that clung to his clothes. This man who had claimed her without permission, who had bound her to his people through ancient laws she didn't understand. "Tell me about your first wife," Ruby said suddenly. Hawk Ridge's body went rigid. For a long moment, only the creak of wagon wheels and horse hooves filled the air. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Elena, she died in the raid 2 springs ago, our unborn child with her." Ruby felt the pain in those simple words. Loss recognized loss. She had carried her own grief for so long it had become part of her, worn smooth by time but never truly healed. "I'm sorry," she said. "She was chosen by my family. A good match. A proper Apache woman." Hawk Ridge's eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "She would have been a better wife than I deserved." Ruby studied his profile, noting the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands gripped the wagon seat. Here was a man who had loved and lost, who carried guilt alongside his grief. She understood that burden. "My husband Samuel died at Gettysburg," she said. "Never got to see the freedom he was fighting for." Hawk Ridge turned to look at her then. Really look at her. Not as a woman bound to him by sacred law, but as another survivor carrying invisible wounds. "You loved him," he said. "I did." Ruby's voice was steady. "He was a good man, believed in something bigger than himself." And now, Ruby considered the question. What did she believe in now? Survival, certainly. The healing power of plants. And patience. The possibility that tomorrow might be better than today. "I believe in choice," she said finally. "I believe people should be free to make their own decisions about their lives, even if those choices lead to loneliness. Even then." They traveled in silence after that, the wagon climbing steadily into the foothills. The landscape changed around them, desert giving way to scattered pine and juniper. Ruby had never been this far from the settlement, never seen this part of the territory. It was beautiful in a harsh way. All red stone and vast sky, painted in shades of copper and gold. The kind of beauty that demanded respect, that could kill the unwary or unprepared. Ruby found herself understanding why the Apache fought so hard to keep it. Storm Walker rode back to the wagon, his expression troubled. "Scouts report cavalry patrol 2 miles south." "They search for tracks. How many?" Hawk Ridge asked. 15. "Men, maybe 20. Ruby felt her stomach tighten. 20 soldiers hunting for Apache sign in country the warriors knew intimately. The odds were not impossible, but they were not good either. We can lose them in the canyon country, Hawk Ridge said, but it will add a day to our journey. Your people will worry, Ruby said. My people will endure. Hawk Ridge's voice carried the weight of leadership, of decisions that affected lives beyond his own. They have waited this long for our return. The wagon turned north, following a barely visible trail through broken rock and scrub brush. Ruby held tight as they navigated steep switchbacks and narrow passages. The Apache warriors moved with practiced silence, their horses picking careful steps across treacherous ground. By mid-afternoon, they had lost the cavalry patrol in a maze of canyons and arroyos. But the detour had taken them deeper into Apache territory, further from anything Ruby recognized. The familiar landmarks of her adopted homeland had vanished. Behind walls of stone and distance, she was truly lost now. Not just geographically, but spiritually. The woman who had lived alone at the edge of settlement, who had built her life on careful independence, no longer existed. In her place sat someone new, someone bound to a man and a people she barely knew. Are you afraid? Hawk Ridge asked. As they made camp in a sheltered canyon, Ruby considered lying, offering some brave response that would preserve her dignity. Instead, she chose honesty. Terrified, she admitted. Good. Hawk Ridge's mouth almost formed a smile. Fear means you understand the stakes. Ruby watched the Apache warriors tend their horses, set up their simple camp, post guards without being asked. These were people who had learned to survive by taking care of each other. No wasted motion, no unnecessary risks. Perhaps there were worse fates than being bound to such a community. As night fell, Ruby lay on her bedroll staring up at stars she had never seen from her homestead. The constellations were the same, but the angle was different. Everything was different. Hawk Ridge's breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. Beside her, in the darkness, she could almost forget the circumstances that had brought them together. Could almost imagine they were simply two people choosing to share the night's dangers. But morning would come, and with it the Apache camp. Ruby would have to face a community that had not chosen her people, who might see her as weakness made flesh. She would have to prove herself worthy of the protection she had never asked for. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and cedar smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Ruby closed her eyes and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring. She fell asleep to the sound of Hawk Ridge whispering prayers in Apache, his voice mixing with the desert wind. The Apache camp spread across a hidden valley, 60 lodges arranged in careful patterns that spoke of generations of survival. Ruby's arrival drew stares from every face, children peering from behind their mothers' skirts, warriors assessing this stranger their war chief had claimed as wife. Morning Star emerged from the largest lodge, her movements fluid as water over stone, beautiful in the way desert flowers were beautiful, sharp and perfectly adapted to harsh conditions. Her dark eyes swept over Ruby with the thoroughness of a hunter evaluating prey. So, Morning Star said in clear English, this is the woman who saved our war chief. Ruby straightened in the wagon seat, meeting that calculating gaze. She had faced down suspicious settlers, hostile traders, and 2 years of frontier isolation. She would not be intimidated by another woman's jealousy, no matter how justified. I am Ruby Freeman, she said simply. I know who you are. Morning Star's voice carried the chill of winter wind. The question is what you are. Hawk Ridge climbed down from the wagon, his movements still careful from his injuries. She is my wife by Apache law. She will be treated with respect. Respect is earned, Morning Star replied. Not given because spirits played tricks in the night. Ruby understood the challenge in those words. She had entered a community bound by relationships stretching back generations. Morning Star's claim on Hawk Ridge predated any sacred bundle. Ceremony. Ruby was the outsider here, the disruption that threatened established order. Gray Eagle approached, his weathered face thoughtful. The woman will have 2 moons to prove herself worthy of the sacred bond. If she fails, the spirits will show us another path. Ruby felt the weight of 60 pairs of eyes on her. 2 months to learn customs she had never seen, to speak a language she barely understood, to become worthy of a marriage she had never chosen. The task felt impossible. "I will try," she said. "Trying is not enough," Morningstar said. "You must succeed." The women of the camp approached slowly, their curiosity warring with suspicion. Ruby was given a small lodge near the edge of the circle, close enough to be watched but far enough to be ignored if necessary. Her few possessions looked pathetic scattered across the buffalo hide floor. Stormwalker's wife, Gentle Rain, brought food and basic supplies. She spoke no English, but her gestures were clear enough. Ruby was expected to learn by watching, to adapt by trial and error. No special consideration would be given for her ignorance. The first week passed in a blur of failures. Ruby burned the bread, tore the hide she was supposed to mend, said the wrong words at the wrong times. Children giggled at her clumsy attempts to carry water in traditional baskets. Even the camp dogs seemed to judge her harshly. Morningstar appeared at her lodge each evening, assessing the day's disasters with cool detachment. "Elena knew these skills as a child," she would say. She was truly Apache. Ruby bit back her responses, swallowing pride with each criticism. She had not asked to be here, had not chosen to replace a woman who had clearly been loved. But she was here now, and withdrawal was not an option. The breakthrough came during the second week. 3 children developed fever, their small bodies burning with sickness that left them listless and pale. The camp's medicine woman, Old Crow, had tried traditional remedies without success. The fever was spreading. Ruby approached Old Crow carefully, offering her knowledge as a suggestion rather than a challenge. Together, they prepared a tea from willow bark and elderberry, ingredients Ruby had brought from her homestead. The children drank reluctantly, their parents watching with desperate hope. By morning, the fevers had broken. The children were sitting up, demanding food and water. Old Crow nodded at Ruby with something approaching approval. "Your plant knowledge is strong," the medicine woman said. "Perhaps the spirits sent you for this purpose." Word of the healing spread through the camp. Ruby found herself approached by mothers with sick babies, warriors with infected wounds, elders with aching joints. Her medical supplies dwindled as she treated ailments that had lingered for months. Morningstar watched these developments with narrowed eyes. "Healing is not the same as belonging," she said. But Ruby sensed a shift in the camp's attitude. Where once there had been suspicion, now there was cautious acceptance. She was useful, and usefulness was currency in a community fighting for survival. The real test came during the 3rd week. Flash floods were common in the canyon country, but this one caught everyone off guard. Ruby was gathering medicinal plants with several children when the wall of water roared down the arroyo. The children froze in terror, but Ruby's knowledge of the terrain kicked in. She had studied every ridge and gully around her homestead, understanding how water moved across this unforgiving landscape. She grabbed the nearest child and pointed toward higher ground. "There!" she shouted in Apache, the words coming naturally. "The rocks!" They scrambled up the canyon wall just as the flood swept through their gathering spot. Ruby counted heads frantically, making sure every child was safe. Her heart hammered as she realized how close they had come to disaster. When they returned to camp, the children chattered excitedly about their adventure. Ruby found herself surrounded by grateful parents, warriors who nodded with respect, women who looked at her with new eyes. Even Morningstar's expression had softened slightly. "You think quickly," she admitted grudgingly. "Perhaps there is hope for you yet." That evening, Hawk Ridge appeared at Ruby's lodge. His wounds had healed completely, leaving only thin scars across his shoulder and chest. He moved with the fluid grace of a natural warrior, but his eyes held the weight of leadership. "You saved them," he said simply. "I couldn't let them die." Ruby was mending a torn dress, her fingers working by firelight. "They're just children. They are our future." Hawk Ridge settled beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Without children, we are nothing." Ruby studied his profile in the dancing light. This man who had claimed her without permission was revealing himself in small moments of vulnerability. She was beginning to understand the burden he carried, the impossible choices he faced daily. "Tell me about your people," she said. Hawk Ridge was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of history. "We were once many. Hundreds of lodges spread across the mountains. Then the soldiers came, and the settlers, and the miners. Every year we grow fewer. Every year the safe places disappear. Is that why you fight?" "I fight because the alternative is disappearance." Hawk Ridge's hands tightened into fists. "My children will not live on reservations, eating government flour and forgetting their names." Ruby heard the pain in his voice, the fear that drove his decisions. She had known loss, but not this kind of slow erosion of identity. Her people had been stolen and sold, but they had found ways to remember themselves. The Apache faced something different, the gradual extinction of their entire way of life. "What about us?" she asked quietly. "What happens when the 2 months are over?" Hawk Ridge turned to look at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "That depends on you and on me." "I never chose this," Ruby said. "But I'm choosing to stay. Why?" Ruby considered the question. Why was she choosing to remain in a place where she would always be an outsider, bound to a man she barely knew? The answer came slowly, built from weeks of small revelations. "Because I understand what it means to fight for survival," she said finally. "Because your people took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Because maybe I can help build something worth preserving." Hawk Ridge reached out, his fingers barely brushing hers. The touch was electric, sending awareness through her entire body. Not passion, but something deeper. Recognition, understanding. "I am beginning to care for you," he said quietly. "Not because of sacred laws, but because of who you are." Ruby felt her heart skip. This was dangerous territory, emotions that could complicate everything. But she could not deny the connection growing between them, built on shared isolation and mutual respect. "I care for you too," she admitted. "But caring is not enough. We need to choose each other." "Then we choose," Hawk Ridge said. "Every day we choose." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the lodge walls. Outside, the camp settled into sleep, secure in the knowledge that their war chief had returned safely. Ruby felt something shift inside her chest, a thawing she had not expected. Perhaps she could build a life here after all. Storm Walker did not return from the supply run. 3 days passed with no word, no sign of the scouting party that had left to trade for ammunition and winter supplies. Hawk Ridge stood at the canyon's edge, scanning the horizon with the patience of a hunter and the worry of a brother. Ruby found him there at dawn, his silhouette carved against the lightning sky. She had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped his rifle when fear threatened to overwhelm duty. "They should have been back yesterday," she said quietly. "They should have been back 2 days ago." Hawk Ridge's voice carried the weight of leadership, of decisions that affected lives beyond his own. "Something is wrong." The answer came with the morning wind. A single rider approached. From the south, his horse lathered with sweat and exhaustion. Not Storm Walker, but a young Apache scout named Running Bear, his face grim with news that would change everything. "Colonel Tavington has Storm Walker," Running Bear reported. "Took him at the trading post. Left this." He handed Hawk Ridge a piece of paper, the writing cramped and official. Ruby read over his shoulder, her blood turning to ice as she recognized the formal language of military demands. "He wants us to surrender," Hawkridge said. "Both of us. In exchange for Stormwalker's life." Ruby's hands trembled as she absorbed the implications. Tavington had not simply captured an Apache warrior. He had taken Hawkridge's brother specifically to force this confrontation. The colonel was using Stormwalker as bait to draw them out. "There's more," Running Bear continued. "Tavington says he will attack the camp if you do not come. He has 40 soldiers, maybe more." Ruby felt the trap closing around them. 40 soldiers against 60 Apache, including women and children. The odds were not impossible, but the cost would be devastating. Too many would die defending a woman who had brought this danger to their doorstep. "I have to go," she said. "We have to go," Hawkridge corrected. "He wants both of us." "No." Ruby turned to face him, her decision crystallizing with painful clarity. "This is about me. Tavington wouldn't care about one Apache warrior. He's using your brother to get to me." Hawkridge's eyes narrowed. "What are you not telling me?" Ruby closed her eyes, feeling the weight of secrets she had carried since Samuel's death. The truth would come out now, whether she wanted it or not. Tavington would make sure of that. "My husband wrote letters," she said quietly, "about the work we did before the war. Helping people find freedom." "What kind of work?" "The Underground Railroad." Ruby's voice was barely a whisper. "We helped runaway slaves reach safe territory." Samuel mentioned some of the routes in his letters home. Hawkridge's face went still. "And Tavington has those letters." Tavington was Samuel's commanding officer. He would have gone through Samuel's personal effects after he died. Ruby felt sick thinking about it. "He's been hunting me across the West, thinking I know Apache hideouts the way I knew slave routes." "Do you?" "Some." Ruby had learned the country during her 2 years of isolation, mapping water sources and safe trails the way she had once mapped freedom routes through Georgia. But not enough to justify this. Running Bear shifted uncomfortably. "There is something else. Tavington says he will hang the woman publicly." "Make an example." Ruby's stomach clenched. Public execution was Tavington's signature warning to other potential Apache sympathizers. He would turn her death into theater, a spectacle designed to discourage anyone else from helping the Apache. "I won't let that happen," Hawkridge said. "You don't have a choice." Ruby's voice was steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "If I don't surrender, Stormwalker dies. If I do surrender, maybe Tavington will be satisfied with one trophy." "You think he will let my brother live?" Ruby hesitated. She had no illusions about Tavington's mercy. The colonel's reputation was built on broken promises and calculated cruelty. But surrendering herself might buy time, might give the Apache a chance to escape. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I have to try." Hawkridge was quiet for a long moment, staring at the message in his hands. Ruby could see the war chief calculating odds, weighing lives against principles. The mathematics of survival were always brutal. "There is another way," he said finally. "What way?" "We go together. Face him together." Ruby shook her head. "That's exactly what he wants. Both of us dead or captured. Maybe, or maybe he wants something else." Hawkridge's eyes were sharp with the intelligence that made him a successful war leader. "You said he thinks you know Apache hideouts. What if we convince him you do? You want me to lie. I want you to bargain. Trade information for Stormwalker's life." Ruby understood the strategy immediately. Give Tavington enough real information to seem credible, mixed with false trails that would lead his soldiers away from the real Apache strongholds. It was dangerous, requiring her to walk a thin line between cooperation and betrayal. "It might work," she said slowly. "But if he realizes I'm lying, then we die together." Ruby studied Hawkridge's face, seeing the love that had grown between them over the past weeks. Not the desperate passion of youth, but something deeper. The recognition that they were stronger together than apart. "I choose you," she said quietly. "Not because of sacred laws, but because I love you." Hawkridge's expression softened. "And I choose you. Every day I choose you." They rode out at midday, leaving the camp in Gray Eagle's capable hands. Ruby had argued for a smaller group, but Hawkridge insisted on bringing a dozen warriors. If Tavington planned treachery, they would not face it alone. The journey to the trading post took 6 hours across broken country. Ruby had time to think, to prepare herself for what was coming. Tavington would try to break her, to force information from her through fear and pain. She had to be ready. "Tell me about Stormwalker," she said as they rode. "My younger brother. By 3 years. Always trying to prove himself worthy of warrior status." Hawkridge's voice carried affection mixed with worry. He volunteered for the supply run to show his courage. And now he's paying for that courage. We all pay for our choices eventually. Ruby nodded, understanding the truth of that statement. She had chosen to save Hawkridge's life, setting in motion everything that followed. She had chosen to stay with the Apache, to try to build a life among them. Now she was choosing to face Tavington, to risk everything for a chance at saving Stormwalker. The trading post appeared in the distance, a cluster of adobe buildings surrounded by cavalry tents. Too many tents. Ruby counted at least 50 soldiers, not the 40 running. Bear had reported. Tavington had reinforced his position, preparing for a siege if necessary. "He's not taking any chances," Hawkridge observed. "Neither should we." They approached under a white flag, their weapons visible but not threatening. Tavington emerged from the largest building, his blue uniform pristine despite the desert heat. He was older than Ruby had expected, probably in his 50s, with the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute authority. "Mrs. Ruby Freeman," he said, his voice carrying. "Across the dusty yard. Your husband wrote about you often. Mentioned how you helped people find safe passage." Ruby's heart hammered against her ribs. The trap was sprung. The secret she had carried for 3 years laid bare. Tavington smiled at her reaction, savoring the moment of revelation. "I wonder," he continued, "are you doing the same for savages?" "Now? Where is Stormwalker?" Hawkridge demanded. Tavington's smile widened. "Safe for now. But his continued health depends on your cooperation." Ruby dismounted slowly, her hands visible and empty. "What do you want?" "Information, routes, hideouts, water sources." Tavington's eyes glittered with anticipation. "Everything you know about Apache movements in this territory. And if I refuse? Then you'll watch your savage husband die first. Then his brother. Then you'll tell me what I want to know anyway." Ruby met Tavington's gaze steadily. "And if I cooperate? Then you'll live long enough to see them hang." The truth hit Ruby with stunning clarity. Tavington had no intention of honoring any bargain. He would extract what information he could, then execute them all as an example. Stormwalker was already dead, or soon would be. But maybe, just maybe, she could buy enough time for something unexpected to happen. In her experience, the unexpected was often the only hope left. "I'll need to see Stormwalker first," she said. "Proof he's alive." Tavington nodded to one of his soldiers. "Bring the prisoner." Ruby prepared herself for whatever came next, drawing on reserves of strength she had built through years of loss and survival. She was no longer the woman who had saved a wounded Apache warrior. She was someone harder, someone who understood the true cost of love. The sun beat down on the trading post yard, painting everything in shades of gold and blood. Ruby stood between two worlds, prepared to sacrifice everything for the chance to save one man's brother. Stormwalker emerged from the building, his wrists bound but his spirit unbroken. Blood stained his shirt from interrogation, but his eyes blazed with defiance. He looked directly at his brother, communicating volumes without words. Ruby felt relief flood through her chest. Stormwalker was alive, battered but breathing. The first part of Tavington's bargain held true, which meant negotiation was still possible. "Now," Tavington said, "let's discuss what you know about Apache movements." Ruby's mind raced through possibilities. She needed to give Tavington enough truth to keep him interested, enough lies to protect the Apache, and enough time for something unexpected to happen. The mathematics of deception were treacherous. "I know some routes," she said carefully. "Water sources, places where small groups might take shelter." "Excellent," Tavington gestured toward the building. "We'll discuss this inside, away from curious ears." Ruby exchanged a glance with Hawk Ridge. They both understood this might be their last moment together. She memorized the planes of his face, the way morning light caught the silver in his hair. If she died today, she wanted to carry this image with her. The trading post interior was dim and cool, a relief from the desert heat. Tavington had set up a makeshift command center, maps spread across rough tables, Apache territories marked in red ink. Ruby studied the charts while appearing to focus on Tavington's questions. "Your husband mentioned detailed knowledge of hidden trails," Tavington began. "Routes that allowed people to move unseen across hostile territory." "Samuel wrote about many things," Ruby said neutrally. "Indeed, but you're being modest, Mrs. Freeman. Your work with the Underground Railroad was quite sophisticated. Networks of safe houses, coded messages, alternate routes when primary paths became compromised." Ruby's stomach tightened. Tavington had done his research, knew far more about her past than she had realized. The colonel had been hunting her for months, maybe years, building a case piece by piece. "That was a long time ago," she said. "Skills like that don't disappear. They adapt." Tavington leaned forward, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Tell me about the canyon routes, the ones that bypass the main settlements." Ruby began to speak, mixing truth with carefully constructed lies. She described real water sources but gave wrong directions. She mentioned actual Apache camps but placed them in locations the warriors had abandoned months ago. Every word was calculated to buy time. Outside, she could hear movement, horses, voices, the sounds of a military operation in motion. Tavington's soldiers were preparing for something, but she couldn't determine what. "Very helpful, Tavington," said after an hour of questions. "But I suspect you're holding back. Perhaps seeing your husband's execution will loosen your tongue." Ruby's blood went cold. "You gave your word." "I gave my word that Stormwalker would live if you cooperated." "I said nothing about the war chief." The trap revealed itself fully now. Tavington had never intended to honor any bargain. He would extract what information he could, then execute them all. Stormwalker's life was leverage, nothing more. "You're making a mistake," Ruby said quietly. "Am I? Explain." Ruby stood slowly, her hands visible and steady. "You think I'm the prize. Here, but you're wrong. I'm the bait." Tavington's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Morning Star knows these mountains better than anyone. She's been tracking your movements since you took Stormwalker. Right now, she's positioned with 20 warriors in the rocks above this post." It was a complete lie, but Ruby delivered it with conviction. Tavington's gaze flickered toward the windows, uncertainty creeping into his expression. "You're bluffing, am I? You have 50 soldiers in open ground. Morning Star has 20 Apache in perfect ambush positions. How do you think that ends?" Ruby was gambling everything on Tavington's knowledge of Apache tactical abilities. Every cavalry officer in the territory knew stories of Apache ambushes, of superior numbers defeated by superior positioning. "Even if you're telling the truth," Tavington said, "you'll still die here." "Yes, But so will you. Ruby saw the doubt in Tavington's eyes, the calculation of a military mind assessing new variables. She pressed her advantage. Morning Star is waiting for a signal. If we don't walk out of here alive, she attacks. Your soldiers might win eventually, but you'll be dead in the first volley. Tavington moved to the window, scanning the surrounding rocks. Ruby held her breath, praying he would see shapes that weren't there, shadows that looked like hidden. Warriors, I don't see anything, he said finally. You're not supposed to. That's what makes them Apache. The standoff stretched taut between them. Ruby could feel Tavington's uncertainty, his growing awareness that the situation had shifted beyond his control. Outside, a horse whinnied nervously, spooked by something in the rocks. "Colonel," a soldier called from the yard. "Movement in the eastern canyon. Looks like riders." Tavington's jaw clenched. "How many?" "Hard to tell. Maybe a dozen, maybe more." Ruby's heart leaped. She had been lying about Morning Star's ambush, but apparently someone was coming. Apache reinforcements, or possibly settlers from the nearby town. Either way, the tactical situation was changing. "Let us go," Ruby said quietly. "All of us. Stormwalker, Hawk Ridge, and me. We'll disappear into the mountains, and you'll never see us again. And if I refuse?" Then Morning Star attacks, the riders in the canyon attack, and this trading post becomes a battlefield. A lot of people die for no good reason. Tavington stared at her for a long moment, weighing options. Ruby could see the war between his military instincts and his personal obsession. The colonel wanted her captured, wanted the information she carried, but he also wanted to survive. "You're asking me to let 3 Apache sympathizers escape justice. I'm asking you to choose your battles wisely." The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Tavington's soldiers were taking defensive positions, but Ruby could see the strain in their movements. They were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, caught in the open with enemies approaching from multiple directions. "Colonel," the soldier called again. "The riders are flying Apache flags. War party, at least 20 strong." Ruby felt a surge of hope. Gray Eagle must have organized a rescue mission, bringing the camp's warriors to extract their war chief. The old man had probably been planning this since the moment they left, preparing for the possibility that negotiation would fail. "Your move, Colonel," Ruby said. Tavington stood frozen between competing pressures. His military training demanded he fight, but his survival instincts counseled retreat. Ruby watched him struggle with the decision, knowing that lives hung in the balance. "Release Stormwalker," he said finally. "All of you get out of here." "Your word as an officer?" "My word as an officer." Ruby nodded, relief flooding through her chest. She had gambled everything on Tavington's rationality, on his ability to recognize a losing situation. The bluff had worked, but barely. They emerged from the trading post to find chaos in the yard. Soldiers scrambled for defensive positions, while Apache warriors appeared on every ridge and rock formation. Ruby's fictional ambush had become reality. Morning Star and 24 fighters surrounding the post with deadly efficiency. Stormwalker was released, his bonds cut by a nervous soldier. He moved immediately to his brother's side, the two men embracing briefly before focusing on the tactical situation. "We need to move," Hawk Ridge said quietly, "before Tavington changes his mind." Ruby nodded, but as they prepared to leave, she made a decision that surprised everyone. Instead of mounting her horse, she walked back toward Tavington. "Colonel," she said, "there's something you should know." "What?" "Your Samuel was a good man. He would have wanted you to find peace, not revenge." Tavington's face went still. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know what it means to carry grief. I know what it means to lose someone you care about." Ruby's voice was gentle but firm. "Samuel wouldn't want his death to cause more death. He was my responsibility. I was supposed to bring him home." You brought his memory home. That's enough. Ruby saw something shift in Tavington's eyes, a crack in the armor of duty and obsession. The colonel was carrying guilt alongside his grief, the weight of decisions that had cost lives. Go, Tavington said finally, before I change my mind. Ruby mounted her horse, joining Hawk Ridge and Stormwalker as they prepared to leave. The Apache warriors began their withdrawal, melting back into the rocks with the same efficiency they had used to appear. As they rode away from the trading post, Ruby felt the weight of the past few hours settling into her bones. She had gambled everything on words and won. Stormwalker was free, Hawk Ridge was safe, and she was still alive to see another sunset. That was foolish, Hawk Ridge said as they crested the first ridge. Talking to Tavington like that. Maybe, but he needed to hear it. He could have shot you. Ruby smiled, feeling the desert wind in her hair. He could have, but he didn't. Sometimes mercy is stronger than vengeance. Behind them, the trading post grew smaller, disappearing into the vast landscape of stone and sky. Ruby looked ahead, toward the Apache camp, toward the life she had chosen to build in this harsh and beautiful country. They had survived another day. For now, that was enough. 6 months after the confrontation at the trading post, Ruby stood in the doorway of her lodge watching Apache children play in the morning sun. The camp had moved twice since then, following seasonal patterns that stretched back generations. Each location felt more like home than the last. Her hands rested on her growing belly, the child within her active in the early morning coolness. The baby kicked against her ribs, already showing the restless energy that seemed to define both parents. Ruby smiled, imagining what this child would become growing up between two worlds. Hawk Ridge emerged from the lodge behind her, his arms circling her waist. His touch was gentle, mindful of her condition, but warm with the affection that had deepened over the months. They had moved beyond the sacred bundle ceremony, beyond the desperate circumstances that had bound them together. What remained was choice, renewed daily. Morning Star wants to know if you need anything, he said. Ruby leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. Morning Star had become her closest friend, the rivalry that had once defined their relationship, transformed into mutual respect. The Apache woman had been instrumental in organizing the rescue at the trading post, her tactical skills proving as sharp as her tongue. Tell her I'm fine. The baby is restless, but that's normal. Like his father, Hawk Ridge said, his voice carrying a note of pride. Or her mother, Ruby countered. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the camp come alive around them. Children ran between the lodges, their laughter bright in the desert air. Women tended cook fires and mended clothing, their hands never idle. Warriors prepared for the day's hunt, checking weapons and discussing strategy. Ruby had found her place in this community, contributing her healing knowledge while learning Apache ways. Old Crow had become her mentor, teaching her the spiritual aspects of medicine that complemented her practical skills. Together, they had treated everything from broken bones to difficult births. The camp had prospered under their combined care. Fewer children died from preventable diseases. Warriors recovered more quickly from injuries. The knowledge Ruby had brought from her previous life had proven as valuable as any weapon. Gray Eagle wants to hold a naming ceremony, Hawk Ridge said, for the baby when he comes. She, Ruby corrected automatically. And yes, I would like that. They had discussed this many times, the traditions that would shape their child's identity. Ruby wanted the baby to know both heritages, to carry the strength of her African ancestors alongside Apache wisdom. The child would be living proof that different worlds could merge without losing their essential character. Stormwalker appeared at the lodge entrance, his face bright with excitement. His capture and rescue had changed him, adding a maturity that made him a more effective warrior and leader. The experience had also deepened his respect for Ruby, recognizing her role in his freedom. "Riders approaching," he announced. 3. Men, they carry a white flag. Ruby and Hawk Ridge exchanged glances. White flags usually meant negotiation, but they had learned to be cautious. Too many truces had been broken, too many promises forgotten when circumstances changed. "Who are they?" Hawk Ridge asked. "Settlers from Copper Springs, the ones who trade with us sometimes." Ruby knew the settlement, a small community of farmers and merchants who had established peaceful relations with the Apache. Unlike the military outposts, Copper Springs had chosen cooperation over conflict, finding mutual benefit in trade relationships. "They're asking for you specifically," Storm Walker continued, looking at Ruby. "Say they have news about Colonel Tavington." Ruby's blood chilled. She had not heard from Tavington since their confrontation at the trading post. Part of her had hoped the colonel had found peace, perhaps transferred to a different assignment. But news about him rarely brought. "Good tidings. I'll meet with them," she said. "We'll meet with them," Hawk Ridge corrected. They gathered in the council lodge, the traditional space for important discussions. The 3 settlers entered nervously, clearly uncomfortable in the Apache camp, but determined to deliver their message. Ruby recognized the lead man, a merchant named Patterson, who had occasionally traded medical supplies. "Mrs. Freeman," Patterson said, his hat clutched in his hands. "We came as soon as we heard." "Heard what?" "Colonel Tavington is dead. Took his own life 3 days ago. Left a letter mentioning you specifically." Ruby felt the world tilt slightly. She had expected many things, but not this. Tavington had seemed too driven, too focused on his mission to surrender to despair. "What did the letter say?" she asked quietly. Patterson reached into his coat, producing a folded piece of paper. "He asked that this be delivered to you." Sighed. "You might understand what he couldn't." Ruby took the letter with trembling hands. Tavington's handwriting was precise, military in its clarity. The words were brief, but heavy with meaning. "Mrs. Freeman, you were right about grief and mercy. Samuel would have wanted better for all of us. I hope you find the peace that escaped me. Colonel William Tavington." Ruby read the letter twice, feeling the weight of Tavington's final acknowledgement. Their brief conversation at the trading post had planted seeds that had apparently taken root. The colonel had found a truth he couldn't live with, or perhaps couldn't live without. "He also left instructions," Patterson continued. "Said the military was to leave your people alone. No more raids, no more hunting parties. He signed orders transferring his command to Fort Union." Hawk Ridge leaned forward. "These orders will be honored?" "Yes, sir. New colonel arrived yesterday. Says he has no interest in chasing Apache through the desert. Too expensive, too dangerous." Ruby felt a burden lift from her shoulders. The immediate threat was gone, removed by Tavington's final act of conscience. The Apache would still face challenges, but they would have breathing room to adapt, to find new ways of surviving in a changing world. "Thank you for bringing this news," she said to Patterson. "Ma'am, there's one more thing. The new colonel, he's authorized me to offer a trade agreement. Regular supplies in exchange for safe passage through Apache territory." Ruby looked at Hawk Ridge, seeing the hope in his eyes. A formal trade agreement would provide security for both sides, establishing rules that could prevent future conflicts. It was the kind of bridge building that might ensure their children grew up in a more peaceful world. "We'll consider it," Hawk Ridge said diplomatically. After the settlers left, Ruby and Hawk Ridge walked to their favorite spot overlooking the valley. The afternoon sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and copper, highlighting the beauty that had drawn the Apache to this land for generations. "Tavington found peace," Ruby said quietly. "Just not the kind he expected. Sometimes peace requires sacrifice." Ruby nodded, understanding the truth of that statement. She had sacrificed her independence to save Hawk Ridge. He had sacrificed his isolation to accept her love. They had both given up pieces of their past to build something new. What kind of world will our child grow up in? She asked, the question that had haunted her throughout the pregnancy. A world where different peoples can choose to build bridges instead of walls, Hawk Ridge replied. A world where love is stronger than fear. Ruby smiled, feeling the baby move within her. Their child would be born into uncertainty, but also into possibility. The future remained unwritten, full of challenges and opportunities in equal measure. Evening approached, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and orange. Ruby and Hawk Ridge returned to their lodge, to the community that had become their family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new chances to build the world they wanted their child to inherit. As night fell, Ruby listened to the sounds of the camp settling into sleep. Children's voices faded into whispers, cook fires burned down to embers, and the desert wind carried the scent of sage and cedar. This was home now, not perfect but real, built on the foundation of two people who had chosen love over fear. The baby kicked again, reminding Ruby that the future was already growing within her. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As they had faced everything else since that morning when Apache warriors had declared her married to a man she barely knew. She had saved Hawk Ridge's life, and in doing so, had found her own. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.